good to have you here, and we were very excited. We flew strip first into Salt Lake City and all the snow on the mountains. You see, I'm Australian, we never get snow unless you go to Mount Kosciuszko. That's right down the bottom of Australia, our largest mountain. And I love the coolness of the air. I was in Idaho here, I think about 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And I'm very happy to be here and to teach you about this incredible body that we live in and its inbuilt ability to heal itself. And it will heal itself if you give it the right conditions, because that's the million-dollar question. If the body was designed to heal itself, why are so many people sick? I'd like to suggest that many are sick today through ignorance. They're not realizing the basic conditions that the body requires to heal. One of my first books, and still one of my favourite books on health, is The Ministry of Healing. So I was very happy to see that they have this book out with the books. And there's a chapter called The Physician, the Educator. Did you know that that's what physician means? It means teacher. So this chapter, on the second page, it says, the only hope of better things is the education of people in the right principles, because so many are sick through ignorance. And the second sentence in that section says, let the physicians teach the people that restorative power lies not in drugs, but in nature. You see, it is the body and the body alone that heals. God's government is a government of freedom, and freedom is based on free choice. I am the master of my destiny, and I'm the one that chooses what I do and what I do not do to my body. It is my God-given right. But many people do not know what to do to their bodies. And this is an area, I believe, that there is so much ignorance around today is about this body and the conditions it needs for healing. I was confronted with this last December when I was down by the rocks of the sea with my grandchildren. My foot went on a slippery rock, up I went, slammed down on my wrist, and the pain and the look of that wrist told me that this needed more than a poultice. I needed to go to emergency. And I'm so glad that God doesn't show us the future, that I would sit in emergency for 6 hours with a very serious injury. I could tell by the pain, and I could tell by the look of the wrist something was seriously wrong. Why did I sit there for 6 hours? Because the whole system is chocked up with people. Here are some of the things I heard. Some of the things that I heard were gravy's fallen on my hand. My finger's sore. My little girl's got a sore elbow. My heart's racing. My blood pressure's gone up. I'm feeling sick. And the nurse said, well, have you had any alcohol today? And she said, oh, just a few. And I thought, no, this whole system is clogged with people who do not know how to look after themselves. I sat there in the most terrible pain thinking, I could fix them, and I could fix them, and I could fix them, and I could fix. So I was confronted with the fact that we as a people don't know how to look after our bodies anymore. And I was also confronted with the fact as to why I do what I do. To teach people how to give their bodies the simple conditions for healing. I'm very thankful for the orthopaedic surgeon that pulled my out-of-place radius back into place. I'm very thankful for the pain-killing medication, and I didn't feel the pain of him pulling it back into place. There was one day. So absolutely in a crisis, we are very thankful for these skills. But the majority of people who were in that emergency department did not need to be there. And if they all knew how to treat a burn from a gravy, how to treat a sore finger, how to treat an elbow, how to get the blood pressure down, how to relax that heart rate, maybe I could have been seen in an hour. We live in a body with an incredible inbuilt ability to heal. And I'm sure we've all had breaks. I'm sure we've all had scrapes. I'm sure we've all had cuts, and they've healed. And look, this hand, it's healed. It all works now. It heals. And that same healing process is all through the body, no matter what the problem is. And another thing I love about the book, The Ministry of Healing, she gives a formula of what to do when someone's sick. She said, in case of sickness, cause should be ascertained. How do you find the cause? You look at the history. My husband's very black and white. If ever he's sick, he looks at the last 24 hours. Got that? What's happened? Because Proverbs 26 verse 2 states that the curse causeless shall not come. In other words, no problem happens without a cause. So ascertain the cause, unhealthful conditions change, wrong habits corrected, then nature is to be assisted in her efforts to expel impurities and re-establish right conditions back in the system. So simple. I love that formula. What we're going to be talking about tonight specifically is the gut. We're going to go on a journey through our gastrointestinal tract. It's a fascinating journey and a misunderstood journey. And I love the Proverbs 14 verse 6, where the Bible says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. When you understand the gastrointestinal tract, you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat it. And we begin with the mouth. The mouth. That's the first organ. We don't think of the mouth as an organ. But this gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube. It's considered an external environment. We know that the skin is an external environment. Anything that touches the skin isn't part of us till it gets through to the blood. Same with the gastrointestinal tract. Anything that goes into the gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me till it gets broken down into tiny little substances that absorbed into the blood. In our first lecture tomorrow, we're going to be looking at diabetes, and I'm going to show you what happens once the nutrients get into the blood. But tonight, we're going to have a look at that amazing, even astonishing process of what changes what's on our plate to microscopic little substances that get into the blood. So let's begin with the mouth. And the mouth is where digestion begins. And a lot of people don't realise that digestion begins in the mouth. And the pH, or the acid-alkaline balance in the mouth, is alkaline. And there are two enzymes that are released in the mouth that start the digestion of certain foods. One enzyme is lingual lipase. Lingual lipase is an enzyme that's released from the sublingual glands, and lingual lipase, it only breaks down one food, and that food is saturated fat. Saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. As you will see as we go down our gastrointestinal tract, all the other fats, their breakdown happens way down under the action of bile from the liver and pancreatic lipase. But saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. So what's a saturated fat? A saturated fat is butter, a saturated fat is coconut oil, palm oil, shea butter. In macadamias, there's a little bit of saturated fat. So in a lot of nuts, there's a small amount of saturated fat. Those fats are unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. A lot of people have shied away from the saturated fat because we've been told that saturated fat causes heart disease. Is that right? Well, tomorrow, the second lecture, we're going to look at the heart, and I will show you that this is actually not the case. Let me give you a bit of historical evidence. The South Pacific Islanders, they've been eating saturated fat for centuries. Centuries. And when Captain Cook landed on those islands, no one was having strokes or heart disease. And if saturated fat did cause strokes and heart disease, wouldn't they be dying like flies? But it actually wasn't the case. So the enzyme that breaks down the saturated fat is called lingual lipase. Lingual because it's released from the sublingual glands under the tongue. And lipase is the enzyme that's the fat breaker. So this is one food where the breakdown begins in the mouth. The other is starch. Often starch is called today carbohydrates. So starch would include all your grains, so pastas, breads, cereals, all our grains. They break down in the mouth under the action of a sublingual, but also release not from the sublingual glands, but glands near that, and it releases salivary amylase, and that salivary amylase is called ptyalin. And ptyalin is the salivary amylase that breaks down starch. And that salivary amylase is not in the mouth in large amounts until the molars are through. So the first teeth that a baby gets is 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. And those teeth are called milk teeth. Do you know why they've been traditionally called milk teeth? Because that's what should be baby's main food, milk. Babies should not be eating food until 3 things are present. Number 1, they can sit. Number 2, they can feed themselves. Number 3, they've got teeth. Isn't that common sense? And you know common sense isn't very common today. There's a psalm, it's a proverb, you could call it too. It's found in 146 verse 3, where the Bible says, "Put not your trust in princes." Who are the princes? The princes would be the authorities in the field, is that right? So princes may be government, may be authorities in nutrition, authorities in medicine, authority in any field. And what does the Bible say? Put not your trust in princes. You know why it says that? Sometimes they get it wrong. Am I right? Sometimes they get it wrong. In fact, in 2020 they said 59 million people would die. Did 59 million people die? No, they didn't. In fact, I think most people realise now that the scare tactics they used in 2020 were actually unnecessary. Is that right? So when the Bible says, "Put not your trust in princes," it doesn't mean you don't go there. It doesn't mean you don't listen to their opinion or advice at times. But the Bible says, "Put not your trust in princes." And unfortunately, many young mothers put their trust in the princes or the princesses. Maybe the nurses that say, "You got to give your baby starch cereal at 6 months of age." And we have got so many babies with gut problems today because at 6 months of age, the ptyalin's not present. So the worst thing to give a baby is starch. And what's rice cereal? Pure starch. What is the reason for that? Well, what the princes say is breast milk doesn't have enough iron in it in the second 6 months. It has more iron in it in the first 6 months, but not in the second 6 months. So in the second 6 months, there's not enough iron in breast milk, so the mother has to give her baby something like rice cereal. Well, this is my next question. Has God made a mistake? Does God make mistakes? God does not make mistakes. And it's only the last 100 years that babies have been fed food. Before that, babies were not fed food. And mothers are told by the princes, by the authorities in the field, if you don't give your baby this cereal, your baby will not develop properly, the brain won't develop properly. And so the mother makes the decision on this. Fear. And never should we make a decision on fear. God said in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, "I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." Knowledge is power, love holds us all together, and a sound mind considers what I'm saying tonight. So you know what this means? It's only the last 100 years babies are being fed food. Was everyone dumb before that? Well, it's before that we had the Galileos, we had the Einsteins, the Rembrandts, the Mozarts, the Bachs. Their brain didn't suffer. The fact is, in the first 6 months of life, babies literally explode in growth. Am I right? And in the second 6 months of life, the growth is not as profound. Yes, they're still growing. In other words, in the first 6 months, the baby's requirements for iron are greater than in the second 6 months. I first heard this when my first baby was only a tiny baby, so I did not give any of my babies any starch until they were sometimes 20 months of age, because it's not until the molars through. What do the molars do? Grind. What do we grind? Grain. What's grain? Starch. That's common sense. My son James, he was not interested in food till he was 16 months of age. Did he suffer? Well, he looks like a bodybuilder today. He's an incredible artist, he's a musician, he's a master builder, so he obviously his brain didn't suffer. And that's why many mothers do, because of fear. Or some mothers are told, give your baby cereal at 6 o'clock, they'll sleep through the night. That sounds attractive. No wonder the baby sleeps through the night. There's a lump in their stomach and they're knocked out. No, it makes no sense. A young couple brought their baby to me. Baby's 5 months old. The baby's roly-poly, lovely-looking baby. They said, our baby's got constipation. So I immediately put the detective ad on. Remember, in case of sickness cause, I began to investigate. We should all be private investigators. I said, has anything different happened in the last month? Oh, we're giving the baby food now. Oh, what are you giving the baby? Oh, cereal at breakfast, sandwiches at lunch, pasta for tea. What's that? 100% starch. And the baby's smiling and I see 2 teeth. 2. And the baby's getting all his food. So for to be able to give the food, they have to mash it all up. Do you know what happens then? The baby doesn't learn to chew. And the very important part of digestion in the mouth is chewing. A lot of people don't chew enough because they were given slop, I call it, as babies. We need to be having crunchy food. I said, but the baby has no teeth. They did not know. They'd listen to the princes. Give your baby starch and the baby will sleep through the night. This is a very important message because a lot of people's digestion problems begin way back then. In my book, Sustain Me, I have a section, What Shall I Feed My Baby? Please take photographs of it and send it to every mother you know so that we can keep these bodies working very well. So the ptyalin is not released in the mouth in large amounts until the molars are through. For some babies, the molars appear about 14 months. For some babies, they don't appear until 20, 22 months of age. And before that, what we used to do, babies sitting at in their high chair, when you're eating, give them a piece of cucumber. Take them the whole meal to get even halfway through it, and you'll see little bits of cucumber all over the tray, little bits of cucumber all over the floor, a few bits go in, that's fine. It's just taste time. It's just taste time. So just fruits and vegetables starting little by little, one a meal, and then by the time the molars are through, then the starch can begin. So these are the only 2 foods that begin their digestion in the mouth. The mouth is the only place we have say over. We have say over 5 things. We have say over what goes in. Is it the best organic food prepared in the best, healthiest way? Or is it devitalised fast food? We're the ones that choose. It's our God-given right to choose what we do to our body. But many people put things into their body that is actually not giving them a healthy body, and that's why knowledge is power. So we choose what goes in. We choose how long it stays in the mouth. Is it chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, or is it chew, 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 chew until it's fully broken down? Because there are no teeth in the stomach. This is the only place we have the ability to chew our food. Some dentists are saying because babies are just given soft food all the time, they don't learn to chew. Their teeth and their jaws and their gums and the roof of their mouth actually don't develop properly because they don't chew enough. Isn't that interesting? We should be eating crunchy food. So when the little 2-year-old is hungry and breakfast isn't ready, you know what you give the 2-year-old? An apple. Don't peel it. Don't core it. They won't die. They won't choke to death. The only time they may choke is if they've never had crunchy food and they don't know how to chew. Do you know if they're hungry, they'll work it out, is that right? So we have say over how long it's in the mouth. It's a good idea to put the knife and fork down between mouthfuls and look out the window. Hopefully you've got a nice view. I've got a very nice view at the moment. Chew, chew, chew. So we have say over what goes in, we have say over how long it stays in the mouth, and we also have say over how much goes in. Is it 5 platefuls of food, or is it a reasonable amount of food? And we're getting to the stomach next, and when we get into the stomach, you will discover that the stomach can only take so much food. You overload it, it just actually can't break it all down effectively. We also have say over, this is the 4th one, how often it goes in. Is it every half hour? Is it every 2 hours? Or is it just at meal times? Do you know, it amazes me when I was little, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said to Mum, I'm hungry. What were we told in the 60s, 50s? Wait for dinner. Is that right? What great advice. Because if you eat at 5, you're not going to be very hungry for tea at 6. It didn't make any sense. And when children say they're starving, they're usually bored. Is that right? And we also have say over, the 5th one, is the environment of entry. Is it a stressful environment or is it a peaceful environment? Because when we're anxious, it actually inhibits the digestive enzyme release for the stomach. Then we swallow. Swallowing is an amazing thing. It's a little flap that closes our trachea and opens our esophagus. And when that swallowing happens, it's a muscular action. It causes the esophagus to start contracting, moving the food down, 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 through a little double-layered valve right here called the cardiac sphincter. It's called the cardiac sphincter because of its nearness to the big cardiac muscle just on the left, which is our heart. And we find people that have problems there. It's called GERD, reflux, heartburn. And if a person goes to the prince, the authority in the field of health, and says, I've got heartburn, what are they usually given? Antacids. Well, that doesn't make any sense because the stomach should be acid. To give antacid when someone's got acid coming up here, that's like shooting the cow because it got into the vegetable garden. Just shut the gate. If you shut the gate, the cow won't get in and eat your veggies. Is that right? Don't shoot the cow. Don't shoot the acid. We need the acid to digest our food. Just shut the gate. Well, why is the gate open? Why is that cardiac sphincter not strong? God did a good job in making a double-layered valve to stop that acid coming up. Well, it must be weak. And because it's a muscle, if the muscle is weak, it's not strong enough to hold it. Why would the muscle be weak? Well, this muscle sits right here in the middle of our diaphragm. And our diaphragm is part of what's called our abdominal muscles. And if those muscles are weak, that muscle will be weak. And so the best thing you can do, one of the best things you can do for your cardiac sphincter is strengthen your core. Have you done your push-ups today? Sorry? Push-ups are a great way to strengthen that core. If you can't do them, you can do ladies. If you can't do ladies, you can do them on the wall or on the bench. And Pilates type exercises are a great way to strengthen the core. One lady said, my core's long gone. Well, if it was, you'd be standing like this. Because it's our core muscles that cause us to stand upright. One of the best things you can do for your back too is strengthen your core. And muscle knows no age. Whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. So that's one point to help with reflux, is strengthen your core muscles. Many people get reflux because they have breakfast like a pauper, lunch like a pauper, and supper is the king and the queen together. We're such a fast society that many people are eating their largest meal at the end of the day, sit down in the easy chair, fall asleep, lie down, and then gravity causes that meal to push up against the cardiac muscle. It's not the odd day you might have dinner with friends. It's what you do day after day after day that can do it. Also, drinking with the meals. When you drink with the meals, you water down your hydrochloric acid, which slows down digestion. Also, eating all day long. We're about to get into the stomach, and when we get into the stomach, you'll see the importance of leaving a break between meals. The stomach is an acid environment, and if someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, my comment is, thank God. Because that's what breaks our protein down, is acid. And I have never met anyone with too much acid. It's actually a myth. So let me show you what lines the stomach. What lines the stomach are big folds. And these big folds are lined with gastric glands. And 2/3 of these gastric glands release mucus. Mucus is 99% water. And the reason why God designed it this way is to cause a thick mucosa wall to line the stomach. And what that does is that protects the lining of the stomach against what's released here. So these glands release mucus, and these glands, called the parietal glands, right in the base of the fold, they release hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid is very important. Do you know dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid that humans do? And have you seen what dogs eat? Just about kill us. My daughter lives out on 7 acres in Wisconsin, and we went out the back door one day and, the smell, and we realised that the dog had pulled a leg from a dead cow and was eating it. The reason they don't die is they've got 10 times the hydrochloric acid that we have. Our gastrointestinal tract is approximately 10 yards long. Theirs is 1 yard long. Strong acid, in and out quick. That's how they survive. Hydrochloric acid is antifungal, antimicrobial, and that's why the dog, their hydrochloric acid kills the bacteria. In fact, the only people that really suffer from food poisoning are people with low hydrochloric acid. I've never met anyone with too much hydrochloric acid, but I've met many people with not enough hydrochloric acid. How do you know if you haven't got enough hydrochloric acid? It's 4 hours after the meal and you feel like you've just eaten it. Because if you had strong hydrochloric acid, it would digest the meal very, very quickly. And so because it's not getting digested efficiently and effectively, it can start to ferment, so that can cause bloating. What is also released from the parietal glands is pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid, they unite. And they unite to release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. This union together will only happen in an acid environment, and pepsin will only act in an acid environment. And that's why for the breaking down of our protein, an acid stomach is important. When we wake up in the morning, it's not acid. It's only released when we smell, see, think food and start tasting food, then it's released. I think we're all familiar with Pavlov's dog, that experiment where just even the thought started to release those enzymes. So what would reduce the hydrochloric acid? What would reduce these enzymes? If someone's anxious or stressed out, that blocks the release of hydrochloric acid. Drinking with the meals. You see, digestion is a chemical process, and water dilutes the chemicals. I'm sure we all remember it from science experiments in school. You pour water on acid, you dilute the acid. So the hydrochloric acid and the pepsinogen are very important. What's also important is not eating between meals. And there have been many experiments done to prove this, and they all come to the same conclusion, that digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours. And as you'll discover as we go through our gastrointestinal tract, that most of our nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine, and our nutrients are absorbed halfway down the small intestine. The only thing that's left is the insoluble fibre. So even when our stomach's empty, we're actually still getting nutrients going into the blood, which goes to the cell to feed the cell. Many people that experience a hunger pang 2 hours after the meal, it's not hunger, it's thirst. The body doesn't know the difference between hunger and thirst. So if ever my children said they were hungry between meals, I give them a glass of water. One day my son Peter came to me at 15, he said, "Mum, the water's not doing it anymore." I looked at my clock and I said, "Great, it's lunchtime." When the water's not doing it anymore, it's usually time to eat food. The body also likes a rest. It likes a rest of about 1 hour. So what does that mean? That equals 5 to 6 hours between meals. So what people have always told, what the princes have always told people, especially diabetics, what have diabetics been told? Eat every 2 hours? Well, they've changed their minds. It's now time-restricted eating. Have a look at time-restricted eating. Time-restricted eating is what is hailed as the most popular way of eating at the moment. It came out of the 5-2 diet, came out of the intermittent fasting. It's also called the 18-6 diet. It's eating twice in a 24-hour period, 6 hours apart. So that's an 18-hour fast. Now, we've been doing this at our health retreat for the last 25 years. And this theory I got out of that little book, The Ministry of Healing. She says, ideally eat 2 meals a day, but for some people, especially if people have breakfast very early and lunch early, they might need an evening meal. If I've learned anything in my many years on the planet, it's not to be absolute. The Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things. Prove it for yourself. Try it. See what works best for you. It says, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. It's Old English. It means try it. If it works, do it. I raised all my children like this. I homeschooled my children, so it was very easy. We had breakfast about 7:30, and then we had lunch at 2. And then what was great with that is all schooling was done by 2 o'clock. The kids very much like that. Now, to be able to do that, and we'll explore this a little bit more detail tomorrow when we look at diabetes, it's important to eat the 3 essential food groups. What are the 3 essential food groups? Fibre. Fibre is an essential nutrient because, as you will see after the break when we go to the colon, that fibre is important to stimulate peristalsis, and that fibre is important to sweep the colon, because there's all these little folds in the colon, as you'll see in my last drawing. So fibre is important. Fibre slowly releases the glucose, so it keeps the food in the stomach for longer. And it's in the fibre part of food, because all plant foods have fibre. You'll get a concentration of your minerals and vitamins, which are very important in the functioning of the body. The second essential nutrient is protein. It is protein that makes up the building blocks of our body. My son James, he's my eldest son, he was born with my body type, and no boy wants my body type. Boys want to be muscle, and I'm little. Well, he changed his body type by working out intensely. Yeah, he looks like a bodybuilder today, he did it. But he also supplemented with protein. Every bodybuilder knows if they want to build up those muscles, they've got to be eating adequate protein. And as a plant-based eater, my protein comes from the legumes. Lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, all the beans and nuts and seeds, they're the best quality proteins. cleanest burning fuel. The other essential is fat. Fat's important, and tomorrow night I'm going to explore that in a little bit more detail when I look at diabetes and also when I look at heart health. Because diabetics have been told, they've come to our retreat and told me, I've been told to stop all the fat. The fat's causing the diabetes. I said, actually, it isn't. But there is one type of fat that will interfere with the blood sugar levels, and I saw it in Walmart today. It's in plastic bottles. It's called vegetable oil. Yeah? Don't touch it. The cheaper the fat, keep away from it. And people have been told by the princes for the last 40 years, fat causes heart disease. Is that right? I'll prove to you tomorrow that it's not true. Fat is actually an essential nutrient. The membrane around every cell in the body is 50% fat. The membrane around every cell in the body is 50% protein. That makes protein and fat essential nutrients. Protein keeps the food in the stomach longer because that's where the protein's broken down. Fat keeps the food in the stomach longer because it coats the food, takes a little longer for the enzymes to get in. I know when I first became mother, I wasn't interested in being in the kitchen all day. I wanted to feed my children, then I got things to do. And then 5 hours later, we eat again. I was in Andalusia, Spain, about 2 months ago, and I stayed in the northern part of southern Spain, out on a property in a 300-year-old stone house. It was very, very nice. But the family I stayed with had 4 children, 2, 4, 6, and 9. And these children ate 2 meals a day. Now, a lot of people think children have got to be fed often, but they've got the same stomach as us. If you give them watermelon for breakfast, yeah, you're going to be in trouble in 2 hours. The meal must be high in fibre, generous protein, great fats. We'll look at food in more detail tomorrow. So these children had breakfast about 9 o'clock. That gives lots of time to drink water. You see, water is an essential nutrient, absolutely. In fact, it's the 3rd most vital element needed for life. 2nd most vital. Number 1 vital element is oxygen. Number 2 is water. And we've got no reserve tank on the back, have we? The only water that goes in is the water that we drink. And the most dehydrated time of the whole day is when you wake up in the morning. So very important to make sure you and the children, everyone, drink adequate water. Ideally 2, maybe 3 glasses before breakfast. Easy for me, I wake at 5, I eat at 7, so I can easily drink about 3 glasses. And don't give your body a torrential downpour. How do you give your body a torrential downpour? 500 mil if you're doing mil, but you do ounces, so 16 ounces all at once. That's a torrential downpour. Yes, we need to drink that much water, but little by little by little. This is what I do. Wake up in the morning, half a glass of water. Go to the bathroom, half a glass of water. Get dressed, another half glass of water. Pray, another half a glass of water. You spread it out. You spread it out. Notice how God sends the rain, little by little. Torrential downpour comes, that's when the topsoil gets washed away, that's when flooding happens. So don't do that to your body. And ideally, you stop half an hour before the meal. When you stop half an hour before the meal, it ensures that you're going to have a nice acid stomach. And then resume drinking water about an hour and a half to 2 hours after the meal. If you're thirsty after a meal, by all means have a mouthful. A mouthful's not going to reduce hydrochloric acid too much. But you will find that when you sit to the meal well hydrated, you won't need to drink with your meals. I know at our retreat a lot of guests say, I keep reaching for the glass. Because it's such a habit, isn't it? Every restaurant you go to, what's the first thing you're asked? What are you going to be drinking? What would you like to drink? We always let them bring water, otherwise they don't leave us alone. They almost think someone's neglected us if we don't have that drink with the meal. So that's another way that hydrochloric gets reduced. It gets reduced when people drink with their meals. It gets reduced when people are eating all day long because they exhaust their hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid gets reduced when the person has their main meal at the end of the day. Our stomach is most prepared for digestion after a good night's sleep, and it has not had a good night's sleep if it's had to work all night. Why would it have to work all night? Because the person had their supper like the king and the queen together and then went to sleep, and the poor old stomach must plod along. It can't stop, because if it stops, the food starts to ferment, and if the person has had meat, it would really start to putrefy. And then main poisoning can happen and the person can die. So the stomach has to keep working all night long. I'm against animal abuse, I'm against child abuse, and I'm against stomach abuse. And many people abuse their stomachs not even knowing. That's like kicking the dog and not thinking that it's hurting the dog. Many people are sick through ignorance. That's why I believe the only hope of better things is educating people in the right principles of how the stomach works. When you know how the stomach works, then you know how to treat it. So back to these 4 children that ate 2 meals a day, their next meal was about 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon. Now the little 2-year-old that might have the biggest struggle because he doesn't eat quite as much as everyone else, he's asleep. He's asleep about 11, 12, 1, and when he wakes up he has a little bit of water, and if he's still wanting something, then the mother might give him a carrot. That's what I do. If my little one was wanting something and the meal's not ready for half an hour, give him a carrot. How long does it take a 2-year-old to eat a carrot? Long time. Don't give them a slice of bread, then they won't eat their meal. Just give them a carrot. And remember, very good for their teeth, very good for their gums, very good for their jaws. They say, I'm hungry. I'd say, okay, if you sit very still on this stool, you can have a carrot. You say it as if it's a great honour. And that's how you can train your children in just to the 2 meals. But, you know, if children are going to school, that won't work. What you can do is give them a substantial breakfast, and then what some mothers do for lunch, they just give them an orange. That's almost like a drink. And then when they come home, are they hungry? Is the Pope a Catholic? In fact, they're always starving when they come home from school. So I know several mothers, that's when they serve the main meal. And they see the bus coming, and if the meal's not quite ready, have a big platter of raw food, you know, snow peas, cucumber, celery, and have a bowl of hummus or guacamole dip. Don't give them bread, then they won't eat their meal. I always save the bread for last if we had bread, because the last thing they'll usually want to eat is the raw, isn't that true? The crunchy. So you put it at the table and said, it's almost ready, and just walk out and get the meal ready, and you come back and half of it's gone. Kids love dipping, and this is a great way to train the children into eating food like this. So the stomach needs to be looked after. Something else is released here, and that's the intrinsic factor. What's the intrinsic factor? The intrinsic factor is the enzyme required to digest or absorb vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is a very misunderstood vitamin. It's actually a bacteria. And as a bacteria, you'll find it in cultured foods. As a bacteria, when you eat an apple off a tree, it's an airborne bacteria. So when you eat the apple straight off the tree, you're getting a little bit of B12. You don't need much B12. So a lot of cultured foods have it. But one of the main reasons people lack or suffer from lack of B12 is because they're also lacking hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor and pepsinogen. Why would that be? Because they're eating all day long, they're having their biggest meal at the end of the day, they're stressed when they're eating, they're drinking with their meals, all of those little bits and pieces. So let me show you how B12 is utilised by the body, and I'm going to use my fingers. Let's say that my my pointer finger is B12. In food, it's bound up with an R protein. When it gets into the stomach, hydrochloric acid releases B12 from R protein. What's also released in the stomach is intrinsic factor. So let's say that this pointer finger is intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor and B12 float together all through the small intestine until they come to the end of the small intestine. When they come to the end of the small intestine, to the ileum, then the intrinsic factor and B12 connect, and they're absorbed into the enterohepatic circulation, which is a circulatory system between the liver and the small intestine. And it stays in circulation until the body needs it. And when it needs it, it grabs it. Most people who have low B12, it's because they've got low hydrochloric acid. So if we have low hydrochloric acid, which is also usually results in low intrinsic factor, how can we boost it? Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper. One lady said, "What do paupers eat?" I said, "Sometimes nothing." Or make breakfast and lunch your main meals, and if you do eat at night, it should be something light that is digested easily. Keep big breaks between meals, ideally about 5 hours between meals. Drink water between meals, not with meals. All that will help to restore the release of good amounts of hydrochloric acid, pepsinogen, and intrinsic factor. But you can also take something to boost it. The juice of a lemon just before the meal will boost the release of hydrochloric acid. Taking a quarter of a cup or a third of a cup of hot ginger tea. Ginger is a sweet bitter, and that can stimulate the release of these digestive enzymes. Also cayenne pepper. Cayenne pepper will wake anything up. So about a third of a teaspoon. If you can't quite handle that, start with a quarter of a teaspoon in about a quarter or a third of a cup of water. Throw that down just before the meal. And if you take that just before the meal, it'll stimulate the release of hydrochloric acid. So there are a few things that you can take to restore hydrochloric acid production. The stomach is an acid environment, and the enzyme that's released to break down protein is pepsin. Pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. That is the only food that is broken down in the stomach, and that's a surprise to many people. It was a surprise to me before I studied the gastrointestinal tract. So 2 things are broken down in the mouth, or the breakdown begins. Only 1 thing is broken down in the stomach, and that is protein. Now, in the mouth, it's an alkaline environment, and the salivary amylase ptyalin starts the starch digestion. When it gets into the stomach, it probably takes about half an hour for the acid to infiltrate, and then the digestion of starch stops. Then we come through this little valve at the bottom of the stomach called the pyloric sphincter. When we wake up in the morning, pyloric sphincter is open. That's why it's a good time to have water, ideally warm water, and it goes straight through and gets absorbed. But when we think, see, smell food, pyloric sphincter shuts, and then you start to eat the food, it starts to come down into the stomach, and pyloric sphincter will not open. It's got sensors. It will not open until the food in the stomach has been broken down to the right state. And then when it senses that, it'll open up. But if someone takes a piece of food mid-morning, say it might be, what do some people take, a sandwich and a cup of tea, or a cake, or maybe they're really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts, whatever it is, when it comes into the stomach, pyloric sphincter shuts the gate. Something's just come in, it's not broken down. And that gate stays shut until the newcomer is broken down, and then pyloric sphincter will open again. And then more food, bit by bit, goes through. And then lunch happens. Pyloric sphincter shuts. Shut the gate. Something's just come. It's not broken down. And what they have discovered, that sometimes at the end of the day, there's still remnants of breakfast in the stomach. Let me give you an illustration. My husband, he's working in the office as the business manager at our retreat at Misty Mountain. He said to me one day, I had a 4-hour job to do today. He said, it's the end of the day and I still haven't done it. Why? Because he kept getting interrupted. The phone would ring. Someone would knock on the door. So this 4-hour job ended up taking 8 hours. Same with the stomach. It's a 4.5-hour job. 3.5 to 4-hour job. But if you keep interrupting, you keep putting something in there, then some of that breakfast can still be in the stomach at the end of the day. That's a bit of a worry in this warm environment, starting to ferment. So we come through the stomach into the duodenum, and this is a very busy place, is the duodenum. Notice it, yes, it's the first part of the small intestine, but we've got the gallbladder there. The gallbladder is like a reservoir, and this reservoir holds the bile. It's the liver that makes the bile. It holds the bile, and when fat is in our food coming into the small intestine, bile is released, and that bile, which the liver makes, so that even if a person has lost their gallbladder, the liver is still making the bile, and that bile, it emulsifies or breaks down the unsaturated fat. Remember, the saturated fat, its breakdown began in the mouth, but the unsaturated fat, its breakdown starts in the small intestine, the duodenum, under the action of bile, made in the liver, stored in the gallbladder. So that's liver. The liver is the enzyme. The liver makes bile as the enzyme that breaks down unsaturated fat. Now, in the duodenum, we're now back to an alkaline environment. And the pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate, and that sodium bicarbonate helps to ensure an alkaline environment in the first part of the small intestine. The pancreas, it releases pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase, it further breaks down the unsaturated fat. Remember the sublingual lipase? It does the saturated fat. The unsaturated fat, when it comes into the first part of the small intestine, the bile emulsifies it down, and the pancreatic lipase further does the breakdown, allowing it then to be absorbed into the blood. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember that in the mouth, there was the release of a salivary amylase called ptyalin. And remember, starch started its breakdown in the mouth, put on hold in the acid stomach, now coming into the duodenum, which again is alkaline, and the pancreatic amylase, it finalizes the starch digestion. That's why it's so important to chew, because when you chew, as much as possible, then your starch can be half broken down by the time it gets down to the duodenum, which makes it a lot easier for the pancreas. The pancreas also releases 2 enzymes, we'll call them the trypsin brothers, because the trypsin brothers, one's called trypsin and one's called chymotrypsin, and their role is to finalize the breakdown of protein. Remember where protein digestion began? It began in the stomach under the action of pepsin. So that starts the breakdown of the protein, but when it comes into the duodenum, the trypsin brothers, they finalise the protein digestion. I've got some good news, it's not going to get any more difficult. And what we're starting to do now, we're moving down through the small intestine, and halfway down the small intestine, all our nutrients are absorbed, if they've had that effective breakdown. All that should be left after that coming down here is insoluble fibre. And that insoluble fibre is important, as we will see when we get into the colon. But what I'd like to do now is I want to show you what happens in what we call the grand finale of digestion. This is the small intestine. The small intestine is lined with villi, looking like little fingers actually. And that villi has a blood capillary network all the way through it. So I'm going to, hopefully this will work. I'm just getting to know this. Yes, we've got blood. There's the blood capillary network that is all through the little capillaries. Now remember I said to you that anything that goes into our gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny particles. Then it becomes part of you and me when it gets absorbed into the blood. But lining, no, that didn't work. We're up here, green, this should work. Yes. I'm just getting used to my electronic whiteboard that is actually a blackboard. Lining the villi is a thick turf wall, and that thick turf wall is made of Lactobacillus acidophilus and bifidus bacterium, called our microbiome. And when we were in our mother's utero, our gut was sterile, no bacteria there. But when we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. And those microorganisms, Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidus bacterium, they're the two permanent ones, and from them all the thousands of others are made. And these microorganisms are responsible for the final breakdown of our food. But didn't the breakdown happen with our enzymes? It certainly did. But these microorganisms, they're responsible for the release of our B vitamins. These microorganisms are responsible for the production of melatonin. And as we'll find out later in the week, melatonin is an important hormone that helps us sleep at night. These microorganisms are also important in the production of glutathione. And glutathione is a very potent antioxidant, called the most potent antioxidant. These microorganisms are also responsible for the absorption of the nutrients out of our gut and into our blood. These microorganisms are also important for the nourishment of the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. These microorganisms play another role. They protect the blood against any harmful pathogens that may be in the gut. You might have heard the quote of Hippocrates, called the father of medicine. He said, "All disease begins in the gut." Because these microorganisms, they play an integral role, yes, in the protection of our blood, but also in that final breakdown, but also in the absorption. It is said in an assessment of Alzheimer's that many Alzheimer patients are lacking B vitamins. Are they lacking B vitamins because they're lacking gut flora? Many things that people are taking today are killing off the gut flora. Antibiotics. Okay, let me just master this. Here we go. Antibiotics, yes, they kill the good and the bad alike. One writer said, when a person takes an antibiotic, it's like they're dropping an atomic bomb in the gastrointestinal tract. What did the atomic bomb do? It killed the good and the bad alike. I'm not against antibiotics, but I believe most people should have about 2 courses in their lifetime. How many people are having 2 a year? I raised all my children without antibiotics and they're all still alive. Every different fibre feeds a different probiotic. Did you know that 10 different types of apple will produce 10 different types of fibre, which will feed 10 different types of microorganisms? Count your fibre selection at each meal. We should be having at least 7 different types of fibre every meal. So in my breakfast this morning I had apple, that's one type. I had grapefruit, another type. I had almonds, that's another type. I had chia seed, another type. I had Brazil nuts, wow, that's 5 different types. I had avocado, that's another one. I had some crackers, wow, I easily got my 7. Count them every meal. How many different types of fibre you are getting. In my series that I did in Andalusia, it was mostly a homeschool families. It was out in a big tent. And I was teaching them about their prebiotics, their fibre. So I said one morning, okay, how many different types of fibre do you have for breakfast? And this little boy jumped up and said, 26. I said, what? I said to his father, 26? And his father went, he's having as many different types as possible. All those different types of fibre feed different microorganisms in our gastrointestinal tract. Fascinating. So that's how you can rebuild your gut flora. By, yes, probiotic foods, but also by looking at the selection of fibre that you have every meal. And so this is where our nutrients absorbed into our blood. When it gets into our blood, then it becomes part of you or me. And tomorrow in our first lecture, I'm going to show you, when we look at diabetes, what happens once it gets out of the gut and into the blood. In my next lecture tonight, we're going to be looking at, let's see if we can go back. Yes, we're here. After the break, we're going to come out of the ileocecal, in through the ileocecal valve, which is a double-layered valve here, into the colon. And we're going to finish our journey through our gastrointestinal tract.